early years of the UFC produced plenty of memorable characters, but few had such an enduring reputation as Tank Abbott. His smash-mouth offense and surly appearance made him one of the sport's first breakout stars, so when the company announced his return after a 5-year absence, the MMA world immediately took notice. Today, we look at Abbott's ill-fated return to the cage and how one of the sport's scariest pioneers turned into one of its biggest jobbers. Welcome to the INC, and this is the unfortunate return of Tank Abbott. David Tank Abbott stakes a claim as one of the most unlikely stars in MMA history. Born in Huntington Beach, California, Abbott had originally trained as a high school wrestler while working a day job in a liquor store, but became best known to locals for his street brawls, with Abbott claiming to have been arrested several times for illegal pit fights. Abbott's notoriety soon caught the attention of local MMA gym Team Punishment, the future stomping ground of UFC Hall of Famer Tito Ortiz. After first applying to compete at UFC 4, Abbott made his MMA debut against 400-pound John Matua at UFC 6, and wasted little time in making an impact on the Wyoming crowd.
That's it! Down, and that is all! He hit the ground very hard!
Abbott eventually made it to the finals before being submitted by Oleg Tektarov, but his performance and positive fan reception saw him become a fixture of later tournaments. While not the most technically refined fighter, Tank's brawling style and mean persona made him a favorite with the Just Bleed crowds of the day. So insane were Abbott's antics that they actually forced the UFC to implement new rules just to restrain his fighting style.
Worship hanging out to the octagon, look out!
Tank wants to throw him out of the octagon!
Tank's run with the company saw a number of highlights, including a short-notice heavyweight title fight against Maurice Smith. Although Tank endured mixed fortunes in the cage, his popularity ensured that the UFC continued booking him prominently, becoming a regular fixture of chat shows and serving as an unofficial mascot of the company's no-holds-barred era. This peaked in 1997 when Abbott appeared in an MMA-focused episode of the sitcom Friends, because after all, who could turn down the chance to beat up Jon Favreau? In 1999, Abbott put his career on hold to sign a contract with World Championship Wrestling, who were looking to cash in on Ken Shamrock's success in the WWF. While Shamrock endeared himself to wrestling fans, Abbott's tenure was much more maligned. So much so that head writer Vince Russo was axed by the company when he suggested that Abbott win their world title. When WCW folded in 2001, so did Abbott's pro wrestling career, but it came just as a familiar face came calling for his services. By the start of the year, the UFC had been taken over by Zuffa Entertainment, who looked to entice lapsed fans by bringing back legends from the sport's early years. After Ken Shamrock's return proved a box office success, the UFC singled out Abbott as the man to revive interest in its ailing heavyweight division, and after months of speculation, was formally announced as a UFC fighter during the main card of UFC 40. Abbott wasted little time in endearing himself to his new colleagues.
Let me tell you something, I've been sitting at home looking at all these posers calling themselves fighters. It's about time someone comes back here and knocks the fuck out of everybody.
Abbott's return came in February 2003 in the co-main event of UFC 41. Much of the card's build had been centered around Abbott's return to the cage, with some marketing material giving the Street Fighter higher billing than Rico Rodriguez's title match with Tim Sylvia. Abbott's opponent was 24-year-old jiu-jitsu ace Frank Mir. The Vegas fighter entered the UFC as one of the heavyweight division's most touted prospects, but had seen his stock take something of a hit after a loss to Ian Freeman 7 months earlier. Despite his inexperience, Mir was earmarked as a potential threat thanks to his dangerous ground game, and for all the things Tank was known for in his prime, submission defense was not one of them.
Nice ankle.
Let it go, he's out.
That was quick.
It took just 46 seconds for Mir to submit Tank in the first round, holding the distinction of the first and so far only toe hold in UFC history. Regardless of his age and potential ring rust, the manner of the loss cast doubts over whether Tank had the skills to coexist with the modern wave of heavyweights. His sophomore outing with Kimo Leopoldo did little to dispel this, as Tank was easily taken down and submitted via head and arm choke. It had taken only 2 minutes of action, but the UFC were immediately having buyer's remorse over Abbott's return. Tank was always known as a crude fighter, even in his heyday, and the 5 years away from the sport only emphasized his technical limitations. If the UFC wanted to get the best out of Abbott, they needed to put him up against another slovenly brawler who avoided submissions like the plague. Luckily, the company already had one on their roster. Wesley Cabbage Carrera had made his UFC debut the previous year, having been a staple of the Hawaiian regional scene where he became known for his extreme durability, often taking huge amounts of punishment without ever being dropped in his career. A match between the brawlers was booked on the main card of UFC 45, an event designed to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the promotion. The fight was unsurprisingly a wild slugfest. While Abbott was dropped twice in the opening stages, he appeared to thrive within the more chaotic nature of the fight. That was until 2 minutes into the first when a series of cabbage knees opened a cut above Abbott's eye, with the cage-side doctors deeming the brawler unable to continue. Whether frustrated by the outcome or realizing his UFC career was likely over, it's safe to say Abbott's corner wasn't happy with the fight's result.
This has no place in the professional sport of mixed martial arts. Guys trying to take cheap shots and pile on each other and throwing water bottles. This is why this sport is trying to gain mainstream acceptance. This bullshit is the last stuff we need.
By this point, it was clear that Abbott was just too antiquated to meet the current standard of UFC competition, and it came as no surprise when the company chose to release him from his contract in early 2004. At 38 and largely spent as a relevant force, most expected Abbott to retire or quietly fade from the spotlight. But such was the fandom from his first UFC run, regional promotions were still willing to take a chance on the California Brute. The most notable was Rumble on the Rock, a Hawaiian promotion considered a proving ground for several of the sport's future stars, with Anderson Silva, Gilbert Melendez, and Chael Sonnen some of the most notable names. With bad blood and an inconclusive ending, company bosses saw mileage in a potential rematch between Abbott and Cabbage. So when the Hawaiian followed Tank out the UFC door, a second bout between the two was almost inevitable. For about a minute and a half, the two put on largely the same performance they had in the UFC, with Tank eager to get the fight to the fence to engage in his dirty boxing. When his attempts to do so failed, the brawler decided to turn to plan B.
Oh, good right hand, drives him! He drives him, Cabbage is in trouble! Cabbage is out, that's it!
Abbott became the first man to knock out Cabbage in his MMA career, reinvigorating the fighter's faltering career and sparking interest in the world's other major promotions. While not the contender he was in his prime, many figured Tank still had mileage as an attraction fighter capable of fan-friendly brawls with some favorable matchmaking. Pride, however, didn't read the memo, instead booking Abbott against judo gold medalist Hidehiko Yoshida, who weathered Abbott's early offense before securing a first-round submission. The fight with Yoshida set a dangerous precedent for the remainder of Tank's career. Annual one-off bookings based on his name value rather than any ability to win a fight, largely against fellow veterans in aspiring upstart promotions. A loss to Paul Buentello in Strikeforce was followed by another loss to local fighter Gary Turner for the British promotion Cage Rage, Turner's first MMA win since 1999. The highest profile fight of Abbott's jobber run came in 2008 when he faced Kimbo Slice for the ambitious Elite XC promotion. Kimbo was taking his first steps in MMA after making his name as a street brawler, where he'd become a household star after several of his matches went viral on social media. And with his brawling style and passionate grassroots support, he was seen by many as the spiritual successor to Abbott. The passing of the torch was about as straightforward as expected. Abbott was dropped multiple times early before Kimbo put the final touches on the match 40 seconds into the first. Abbott giving fans a flop that another WCW alum would surely be proud of. Abbott's final MMA fight came in 2013 against Ruben Warpath Villarroyale. An out-of-shape Abbott was finished midway through the second round in a match so bad, YouTube wouldn't allow it to be shown on its platform. The fight left Abbott with an unflattering 10-15 record, 8 of those losses coming since returning in 2003. His last win came in 2009 against Mike Bork for the short-lived War Gods promotion owned by fellow pro wrestling exile Ken Shamrock. The end of his MMA career didn't stop Abbott from pursuing other ventures in combat sports. In 2011, Abbott agreed to a backyard rematch with UFC veteran Scott Ferozzo, who'd beaten Abbott in the two's first meeting at UFC 11. Abbott even teased a return to the cage in 2016, only for his match with Dan Severn to be canceled the day before the event, after Abbott failed the required medical tests from the Arizona Athletic Commission. After battling several health issues, including a liver replacement, Abbott has become a regular fixture of the MMA podcast circuit, the wizened and reflective view on his time in the sport being a far cry from the reckless brute of his early years, although the fighter's still shown he remains on the pulse of modern MMA fans.
Tito Ortiz is a pussy mentally. That guy, like I said, he's a dumbass, and he has no thread of integrity. He's just out there spewing all these cliches, trying to get himself over, like, God bless America, and we're all this and that. It was sickening.
It doesn't take mental gymnastics to work out why Tank Abbott's return proved such a failure. In a modern age of advanced training and high conditioning, Abbott's reckless style and unwillingness to hone his craft was quickly found out. That, combined with his advancing age and deteriorating chin, put him well below the sport's rising skill ceiling. Modern fans will likely dismiss Abbott as little more than a burly, out-of-shape brawler. Although, given the state of modern UFC heavyweights, he might be a bit of a trailblazer. This is the INC. Please like, share, and subscribe. Post your feedback in the comments and donate to our Patreon page for hours of exclusive content.